Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles have significantly influenced practically all vampire media we now consume. Its romantic and humane interpretation of the blood-sucking creatures shifted the way we view and describe vampires. From the first book, entitled Interview with a Vampire, released in 1976, to the 1994 movie by the same title, and the 2002 Queen of the Damned, Rice's universe continues to get new adaptations and readings, one of them being the 2022 AMC Plus show. Now, despite its non-existent marketing campaign, I finally did watch the first season and found that writers, actors, and showrunners changed the source material quite a lot. And surprisingly, I ended up absolutely loving almost every single change that the creators implemented. Mostly because the 1994 adaptation was a result of numerous reworkings with the goal of aligning the material with the heteronormative standards held within Hollywood. The 2022 show ups the queerness and explicitness of the original, all while exploring new dynamics and themes. So let's see what the creators changed in relation to the Vampire Chronicles and how it affects the story we know and love. Just a heads up, this video will specifically deal with the first season and mostly with the first book of the Vampire Chronicles, as the first season depicts the first half of the book. And it is also based on my observations, so it's almost guaranteed that I have missed a detail or two. And I heavily encourage you to point those out in the comments, as well as share your opinions on the changes implemented. I know I'm late to the party and everyone is currently raving about the season 2 finale, but do I care? Not really. Also, convincing my friends to watch a long-ass show about gay vampires is proven to be quite difficult, so I come to you, people on the internet, with my thoughts and opinions. I'm also dealing with a minor cold right now, so it's just me, a cup of tea, and a fucking ginger shot against the world. Now, this new adaptation has been in the workings for a while, and its road to our screens was nothing if not rocky. For years, rights were held by Warner Bros., which produced Interview with the Vampire and Queen of the Damned, but further attempts at launching a franchise ultimately fell through. According to The Hollywood Reporter, in 2014, Universal and Image Entertainment acquired the rights to Anne Rice's book series, as well as the screenplay of Tale of the Body Thief, adapted by Christopher, who is Anne Rice's son. Alex Kurtzman and Roberto Orci were set to start producing movie adaptations of the series, but only 2 years later, in 2016, Anne Rice herself made a Facebook post saying it did not work out. The author also shared that she thought a TV series would be a better fit for her vision of the Vampire Chronicles. As she said, "In this, the new golden age of television, such a series is the way to let the entire story of the vampires unfold." In 2017, the rights were optioned by Paramount Television and Anonymous Content. Amy Powell, the president of Paramount TV, was quite hyped for the project. As she put it, "The rich and vast world she has created with the Vampire Chronicles is unmatched and sophisticated with 90s gothic undertones that will be perfectly suited to captivate audiences." But, you know, Anne Rice wouldn't be Anne Rice if the production was in complete chaos that would make anyone go bald and start considering traveling to Turkey to get a hair transplant. The same was true for the 1994 adaptation. Here is a great video about that. So in 2018, the project saw some major changes in production roles, and the appointed showrunner, Brian Fuller, quit. In 2019, Hulu landed the show and appointed Dee Johnson as the new showrunner. But not even a year later, it was announced that they will not be moving through with the project, and the rights were, once again, up for sale. In December of 2019, a cryptic message was posted to the official The Vampire Chronicles Facebook page. "We realize it's been some time since we've given you an update. Please allow me to assure you that magnificently exciting things are happening behind the scenes, and we are dying to talk to you about them. But in this particular moment, we are sworn to secrecy. The minute, and I assure you, the minute we are free to discuss the latest developments, many of them the most exciting since we began work on this, we will do so." Finally, in May 2020, Variety announced that the rights now belong to AMC Plus, with Rolling Jones as the chosen showrunner. This would ultimately end up to be the final configuration that would actually lead to the first season of the show being released in 2022. Despite the fact that the Vampire Chronicles fanbase is very dedicated and oftentimes quite critical to any minor change to their beloved world described in the books, the series has received both critical and universal critical acclaim and was not turned to pieces. So let's examine why these creative liberties work and how they influence the relationship dynamics of the original. I got a sugar allergy and this is corn syrup, so, it's gonna be fun. The creators are very adamant about trying to, for the most part, stay true to Anne Rice's world. In the behind the scenes, the executive producer Alan Taylor calls the show a rigorous and honest engagement with the source material. And in a New York Times interview, Rolling Jones claims that it's a celebration of Anne, not a desecration. Jones also said that expanding on the canon and not fully rewriting it was important while creating the show, as per the official MC Plus podcast.
Were you in the writer's room being like, WWARD, what would Anne Rice do?
Yeah, that was big.
Really?
That was essential. There were a couple of caveats. Make it here and now. Make it grand and big.
Well, let's see how these claims hold up when put against the source material. I am, once again, going to be looking into the first season, and seeing as it is based on the first half of Interview with the Vampire, with some specs of the Vampire Lestat thrown in, I'm going to be referencing this specific books from the Vampire Chronicles, as well as the 90s movie with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt. For the sake of navigating this easier, I have separated all of the changes into 3 categories: fuck the original, fuck subtext and subtlety, and fuck the 1994 movie. Let's start with the last one. Despite the fact that the 1994 Interview with the Vampire movie director Neil Jordan claimed that if you read the book, it is as gay as the film, it really isn't, even though the first book is admittedly on the tamer side when explicitly stating the homosexual relationships the vampires engage in. The following 3 volumes of the Vampire Chronicles, with improved levels of sexual fluidity, were already out when the movie was being created. More to that, the movie script was actually a result of many rewrites Anne Rice had to make in order to try and make her work more acceptable for the heteronormative Hollywood ideals. And she was on that grind. She was doing everything from making Louis a woman to removing numerous love confessions, thus pretending that the 2 pieces of media are as gay as each other is nothing but delusion. The 1994 movie is, of course, not exactly straight, but it does lack the definitiveness and the explicitness of the Vampire Chronicles. The new show, however, dives teeth first into the relationship between Louis and Lestat, making a previously tame-ish thing more overt and putting a lot of focus onto it. As Alan Taylor says in the behind the scenes,
Lestat has very powerful feelings for Louis. Their relationship is the key to the whole thing, and for better or worse, because their relationship is beautiful and ghastly.
The showrunner, Rolling Jones, referred to the relationship as this great romance that was never really written, but we all kind of agree it happened, and pointed to the fact that the first book did not outright state it, but rather alluded to it, while the later books talked about it in a way that implied it was indeed a romantic bond. Another detail comes from the event that starts the whole story. In the 1994 movie, Louis' brother is substituted for a wife and a child, allegedly to heterosexualize the protagonist. The 2022 show brings back the brother character and his religious obsession as the catalyst for what happens next, even though it alters the timeline and the circumstances, but more on that later. When combined, these 2 aspects make the new adaptation infinitely more queer, which, as one may argue, might take root in the fact that nowadays queer characters are way more accepted on TV than in the previous decades. As Pippin Book puts it, it's also more romantic. Where the original book traded in homoerotic undertones, Louis and Lestat are unmistakably a gay couple. The show, thus, may not be closer to the first book, but it is closer to the overall series. As Jacob Anderson, the actor portraying Louis, points out in an interview, they are in a romantic relationship in the books. They're married by the end. Maybe Anne Rice didn't fully know what their relationship was at first. The style was very different in the first book, and because we're adapting the whole of the Vampire Chronicles and taking things from later books and repurposing them, the idea of telling the story and them not being a couple, well, there's no show. In addition, vampire vision and vampire eyes, which are mentioned numerous times throughout the book, are only really present in Brad Pitt's and Antonio Banderas' characters, while the other vampires are left with barely visible contacts that don't really give them that haunting effect, even though it is implied that they were used for all of the vampires. The show, on the other hand, goes all in with the freaky eyes, which kind of makes you feel like that one meme about blue-eyed people. This point is talked about a lot in the behind the scenes.
Well, the eyes are described, very beautifully in the novels, and we've been very true to the descriptions that we were given.
Each of our vampires has special contact lenses that they wear, and they each have their own color.
And they have different contact lenses for different moods and different levels of arousal and of ferocity.
When they attack, their pupils dilate really big, so we have separate contacts for that.
Finally, the show, unlike the movie, gives its vampires retractable fangs. The books make it quite clear that Anne Rice's vampires can hide their fangs. Take, for example, these quotes from The Vampire Lestat. "I saw his eyes round and empty as the fangs descended over his drawn lip, and she smiled, her white fangs just touching her lower lip, then vanishing." Or, in convulsing, he distended his fangs as a cobra might, and he shot forward. The 1994 interview does not have that. There, the fangs are always present and can only be hidden by shutting the fuck up, which characters don't do a lot. That might be attributed to the fact that CGI was not quite there yet and dentures could not give you the same effect, but I couldn't find a solid source on why the choice was made. The show, on the contrary, uses a mix of dentures and CGI to show the actual process of vampire fangs growing when they're about to bite.
So obviously when they're about to eat, that's when their fangs appear, and that will be a combination of us and digital effects.
This isn't really a significant point, but I just found it to be a nice touch. So, what do we get from all this? I did not just include the segment to bash the 1994 movie, believe it or not, but I do think a comparison of accuracy and explicitness of queerness is quite important to seeing how the movie and TV industry, as well as society, progress. And it also helps us conclude that while the show gives a few nods to the original movie, it uses books as source material first and foremost. And, Jacob Anderson, unlike Brad Pitt, can actually act. On this note, let's move to the points from the original universe that the show actually expands on. Turns out, I don't know how to spell subtlety. When it comes to saying fuck subtlety, a moment that I found particularly interesting was a line in the first episode. Particularly a line about where the interviewer and Louis met.
Obviously, I've come to embrace my sexuality. Of course, you know that. We met at a gay bar, didn't we, Daniel?
Which might seem like fan service or a little throwaway reference to either of the characters' sexualities. This little detail, however, is actually a logical continuation of what is implied in the Interview with the Vampire book. As pointed out by Osap, the beginning of the novel itself sets the reader up to expect a less than straight story. Louis and the boy reporter he met at a bar are in an apartment on Divisadero Street, a street just at the edge of the gay district in San Francisco. Thus, the moment did not materialize out of nowhere, but served as a wink towards people who noticed the reference in the original. The biggest expansion on the lore, however, is the fact that the show does not depict the original interview that happened in 1970s. Within the new narrative, Louis and the boy first meet in 1973, but the interview does not go well, and they revisit it in 2022 after the journalist, which now has a name, receives a letter containing an invitation to go through the story again and write a book based on it. The character that is simply referred to as the boy in Interview with the Vampire is, just like in later books of the Vampire Chronicles, called Daniel Malloy in the show, and he's aged up from his 20s to his 60s to align with the plot. In the new interview, he is an old, hard-headed journalist with over 40 years of experience under his belt, nearing the end of his career and battling Parkinson's. As Eric Bogosian, the actor who portrays Daniel Malloy in the show, shares in one of the episodes of the official AMC Plus podcasts,
I think that Daniel, as written in the script, has said to himself, this is a chance to go back and do it right. I missed a big opportunity 40 something years ago. And now I'm going to go and I'm going to blow everybody's mind, and I'm going to get, another Pulitzer, and I'm going to grab that brass ring and I'm going to make a lot of money.
One more aspect, expanding on the text of Interview with the Vampire specifically, is Daniel's addiction, which is further elaborated on in the second season, but is referenced to as early as the first episode, where he tells Louis that the reason for him being in a gay bar was that he was trying to score. Malloy has clearly been through a lot, so making him the same naive and compliant 20-something-year-old boy would have honestly made no sense. This, in my opinion, spices things up and gives the character a new interesting edge. Unlike the boy in the book, he catches Louis contradicting his own story and really grills him on the details, not just blindly taking in anything the vampire says. This time, Malloy is prepared and not really afraid of anything. The dude is simply too old and sick to be scared of death, and his main ambitions lie within getting a fat shack and getting to know what actually happened in that story a scary fanged dude told him over 40 years ago. As the showrunner Rolling Jones puts it,
we wanted to put a meatier, more aggressive journalist in the room to ask some questions, but we also first and foremost wanted to revere what Anne had made. So we were like, oh, well, what if it's the same guy?
The Daniel we see in the show is really invested into getting to the bottom of the story, not shying away from almost driving Louis to a full-on mental breakdown.
Was it raining, Louis?
She couldn't burn him.
You cursed her into the darkness. You chose Lestat over her time and time again. You don't need a memoir, Louis. You need 100 sessions of EMDR. You know the shit they put soldiers through when they see one of their platoon buddies get blown up in front of them?
With the Interview being moved from the 1970s to 2020s and from San Francisco to Dubai, another layer gets added. The interviewer and Louis now share some history and have certain ideas of how the other one would behave, which backfires on Louis' end. As Jacob Anderson shares in an interview with Esquire, part of the dynamic between Louis and Malloy is that the interview isn't going how he planned it to go. He has a narrative he wants to push, and he didn't expect to be questioned. Louis sees a bit of himself in this elderly man, and that's quite a confronting thing for a detached 147-year-old vampire. The fact that the character dynamic is changed to include less of the power imbalance and more of the old man's audacity gives the show the opportunity to explore the questions that the majority of the readers were asking themselves while getting familiar with the original book. What is real and what is Louis' distorted perception or just straight up lies? Is there maybe a second point of view to the story? Is Lestat really that evil? Or is he just French? Though that one might be the same. In the second episode of the official AMC Plus podcast that I previously mentioned, Sam Reed, the show's Lestat, recalls asking the same questions while getting ready to play the role and actually playing it.
The first thing that I was most curious about with Roland was, okay, how much of this is real Lestat and how much of this is Louis' perspective of Lestat? Because obviously this is a memory and, but this is all through Louis' eyes. And is this actually how Lestat is? The whole revisiting the interview aspect, however, only gets fully fleshed out in season 2. As per the interview Rolling Jones gave in 2022, another change is making the interviewer more than just bookends and really fleshing out Daniel Malloy. We're building season 2 right now, and I cannot tell you how important the relationship between Louis and Daniel is and how important the first interview is. I personally believe this choice works out very well in terms of altering the narrative while keeping the main plot points and discussing the same story. It reframes the familiar characters in a way that allows the viewer to get a new perspective on them and their actions. The new ballsy Daniel Malloy makes sense. What does an old dude who is practically done with his career and, as it is implied, with life overall as well, have to lose other than his time?
Let me ask you a very fair question. What do you do successfully? Quickly.
More to that, seeing Louis' narrative fall apart brings a very satisfying feeling. A satisfying feeling that maybe only compares to finally washing off the fuck ton of sticky blood that you put on yourself on a Thursday evening to entertain like 1,000 queers and 3 allies on the internet.
And this is my best friend, Valentina. She's an ally. Talk, Valentina. Ally.
Let's move on to what the creators actually changed, I guess. This approach to adapting the source material, keeping the main plot points while putting them through a new lens or changing their implications within the narrative, is a motif that we see throughout all the changes the creators implemented. The 1994 movie, despite all its flaws and attempts to heterosexualize vampires, was pretty true to this book. So I do think that bringing in some major changes to the overall story and character dynamics works and makes sense, and is simply more interesting than something that follows a 50-year-old novel to a T. Let's start with something smaller. The character of Antoinette, Lestat's side piece slash musician slash wannabe spy. The show depicts a lady, while the book, while never actually mentioning the name, tells us of a male musician whose story follows a very similar arc. If I'm not mistaken, the musician's name is confirmed to be Antoine later in the Vampire Chronicles, but that's just a little detail added to the gender flip. Interview with the Vampire describes Antoine's relationship with Lestat the following way. Lestat had a musician friend in the Rue de Maine. I told you he played with his victims, made friends with them, seduced them into trusting and liking him, even loving him, before he killed. So he apparently played with this young boy, though it had gone on longer than any other such friendship I had ever observed. The young boy wrote good music, and often Lestat brought fresh sheets. Later on, Lestat tells Louis that he did actually kill the boy, which turns out to be a lie when the musician actually helps Lestat avenge himself after Louis and Claudia's attempt to kill him. In fact, he gets turned into a vampire, and he even accompanies Lestat when he comes back to haunt Louis and Claudia. Then I saw the musician. For now, he turned his face upwards toward me, and it shone from the dark like a white light. The frustration and care were utterly erased from his stark features. His great dark eyes peered at me from the white flesh. He had become a vampire. Antoinette's arc is quite similar, with a few exceptions. First, obviously, the creators do a little gender flip moment, which essentially frames Lestat as bisexual within the show's narrative.
Queer, half queer, mostly queer, what is it? Non-discriminating.
Their relationship also gets amplified in comparison to the original book. For instance, Antoinette even helps Lestat record the 20th century vampire version of a SoundCloud apology rap. Second, the timeline gets changed around a bit, with Antoinette now actively trying to help prevent Lestat's murder. Antoinette even gets killed alongside Lestat, whereas Blondie is fully on his own in the original book, with no one trying to save his ass. But that, once again, might be because he's French. Another aspect that the creators changed, but it does not have that much impact on the narrative, is vampire sexuality. To be short and blunt, they fuck. While Anne Rice's work equates biting someone to the pleasure of passion and draws heavy parallels between drinking blood and sex, her vampires do not engage in sexual contact as humans do, but they still have sexually charged encounters. This is summarized quite succinctly in the following quote. For vampires, physical love culminates and is satisfied in one thing: the kill. I do once again go deeper into that in my last video, but the main point is that Interview with the Vampire establishes that vampires are kind of sexless creatures. The show, on the other hand, does not shy away from sex. As Pippin Book puts it, there's gay and bisexual sex, grisly threesomes, lots of flesh. It's very sweaty. When talking about this creative liberty, Sam Reed puts it like this. What did that mean to you, finally getting to tell the story in its full explicit sensuality? I was very happy it was going that way, because it wouldn't be Interview with a Vampire if it didn't. It's really important that we explored that, because a big part of their relationship is this intense connection. And Rice describes drinking each other's blood as incredibly erotic, almost like having sex. So how do you translate that on screen? I guess nude levitation translates quite well. I think it's really important that we don't shy away from it, because if we spend the whole season going, will they, won't they, we don't get to the really interesting part of this complex relationship. This might also be attributed to what I've mentioned before, the changed social norms as well as what is and what isn't allowed on TV. After all, it has been 30 years since the movie adaptation, and almost 50 years since the release of the original book, and queer acceptance and representation has come a long way since then. More to that, consider Considering the fact that Twilight and its themes of Mormonism-induced sexual repression still loom large over a lot of vampire media, or at least it's always kept in the back of the mind when talking about vampire romance stories, the show might also be utilizing sex as a way to demonstrate that its vampires are decadent creatures of the night, and bring a motif that has historically been connected to vampires to the forefront of the narrative. This is of course just a speculation, as the creators or actors did not share their reasoning for this choice on any of the podcasts or in any of the interviews that I have used as sources. Once again, I did a whole video on vampires and sexuality, but Sam Reed summarizes it beautifully in his interview with Esquire. Whether it's Dracula or Nosferatu or Louis and Lestat, vampires are always yearning for love. The key themes to which they're always connected are death, which everyone has a certain relationship with, and sex. Finally, we get to the juiciest part, aka the changes the show makes to the time period, which influences the narrative, and the main characters, and subsequently their interpersonal relationship dynamics. First and foremost, the very beginning of the vampire story gets transported to the 1910s and not the late 1700s like it was in the book. We do get to keep the key location, which is Louisiana and New Orleans in particular, a city that is arguably as much of a character as the vampires themselves. Now we can see the same trend as with other changes I will be discussing in the chapter. The 18th century has already been covered by the book and the movie adaptation, so why not change it up? The events depicted in the first season take place in a very specific location within a very specific time frame, in Storyville, which was kind of like the red light district of the New Orleans in late 19th and early 20th century. As shared in an interview by Bailey Buss, the actress who portrays Claudia in the first season, Storyville is not something that's talked about a lot in New Orleans history. It's something that's fresh and has not been seen on TV before. Storyville serves as the backdrop and reinforcement for the choices the creators made in regards to the character of Louis and Claudia, namely making them black Creoles. As Rolling Jones puts it, nobody at AMC was really interested in 7 seasons of the regretful plantation owner, acknowledging at the same time that reducing the idea to a simple casting choice would not have made sense within the narrative. Thus, Louis' character not only gets changed from white Creole to black Creole, he gets a whole new backstory, namely the plantation owner in the sugar business that is depicted within this book gets turned into a brothel owner whose grandfather owned a plantation. The showrunner said that making Louis into a brothel owner was specifically based on the historical circumstances as well as the moral grayness of his doings, as alluded to in the book.
And it just so happened there was a spot at that historical time where a black man could get in on some business and still have the sort of morally gray thing that owning a plantation would. And I don't know, it all actually clicked into place pretty quickly.
The phenomenon of Storyville, which is not often portrayed in the media, provides us with an opportunity of exploring a new vampire aesthetic. And as much as I love the fancy 18th to 19th century aristocrats, we have seen enough of them already. As pointed out by Jacob Anderson, the big black population of the city further adds to the logic of the choice that the creators made. There's something really interesting about vampirism and how it relates to race and sexuality and otherness. So I think it would be a missed opportunity to not explore that, especially in New Orleans, which is such a big part of the books. It's a 60% black population, so to not have Louis be a black or Creole man feels odd. Same sentiment is expressed by Bailey Buss. The show is very diverse, just like New Orleans. I never felt more accepted as a black woman in my life as a mix than I have in New Orleans. In addition to the race and the occupation, the show also changes Louis' sexuality. In the book, he expresses his love for Babette, Lestat, and then Armand, and his sexuality is depicted as overall fluid, but bisexual compliant, as is the case with most of the vampires that Anne Rice has created. He talks about and displays more queer lenience after being turned into a vampire, with his mortal life as the last resort for heterosexuality. The show, however, makes him explicitly homosexual and puts him through an identity and sexuality crisis even before his transformation into a bloodsucker. Jacob Anderson phrases it the following way.
I think Louis is very confused about his identity. He's somebody that wears many different hats, and he's trying to juggle a family life, a business, He's got his siblings, his sexuality, his race, his family history. These things are all kind of contributing to him having a bit of an identity crisis.
Now, I'm definitely not the person to share my opinion or experiences when it comes to the intersection of blackness and queerness, so I would like to redirect you to videos by actual black queer creators, and I'm gonna be heavily relying on quotes in this particular chapter, for obvious reasons. Take a look at me. The only time I have experienced racism is when a very passionate but a very misguided old lady called me a slur used for migrant workers in my hometown in Russia. These choices made by the creators impact Louis' character and his character arc in a major way. For instance, his choice to accept the dark gift is made under completely different circumstances. Louis does not only grieve his brother in show, we see him be humiliated based on his race, struggling to fit in, and trying to play into the respectability politics. Same respectability politics also impact black queer people to this day, as mentioned by the creator Think Piss Tribe in their coming out video detailing the story of dealing with and accepting their own identity.
Because black people, and from my experiences, black men are under a lot of societal pressures to act in a very specific way that is deemed as typical or respectable enough.
Louis' decision to join Lestat and his blood-sucking shenanigans largely comes from him trying to escape the racism and homophobia he faces. This is what Jacob Anderson shared in an interview. Something I really responded to is the idea that you can't buy yourself out of the perception or labels that society puts on you. No amount of power can enact that change. It's a big thing for Louis. He thinks getting this vampiric power is going to give him power in a human contact, but it doesn't. He still comes up against the same stuff, because there's no amount of power that can buy you out of racism. I thought that was a really cool thing to frame around vampire mythology. Tananarive Due, an expert on black horror, was invited to the official AMC podcast to discuss the change implemented to the source material, in which he clarified that black horror cannot be achieved by a simple casting choice. It needs to center a black protagonist and be embedded into the fabric of the story.
Black horror is a story that centers a black protagonist, I would say check. And also he's not in isolation in his blackness in the story. He got a mama, he got a sister, he's got a brother. We see him at home. You know, how many times do you see black characters where you never follow them home? And I love the way this new interview with the Vampire series actually weaves in blackness, meaning it's an authentic experience. There's discrimination, there's racism, there's jazz, and I mean, just seeing black folks living their lives, that to me does make this black horror.
The reimagining of Louis that the show provides also impacts the dynamic of his and Lestat's relationship. But before we get to that, let's briefly discuss how the show's Lestat differs from the blonde Frenchie we learn about in the original book. So, Lestat's character is changed quite a lot from both the book and the 1994 adaptation. And that change, like the boy turning into Daniel Malai, comes from the creators incorporating some of the later Anne Rice work, which is the vampire Lestat in this case, as described on the AMC Plus podcast.
So there's a very famous sort of rewrite of Lestat, starting with book 2. He's an aggressively different character than he was in book 1, and but that's the Lestat that she carried on for the rest of time. And I was like, okay, that should be Lestat.
The same episode also mentions that this version of Lestat isn't necessarily just like the version from the first book, and that's what Sam Reed talks about when discussing his take on the character. The actor himself is admittedly a big fan of Anne Rice's work, and he talks about Lestat with great fondness, even taking a shit ton of language classes to be able to convincingly yell in French. However, this particular rendition of Lestat is kind of all over the place. We're supposed to be seeing Lestat through Louis' eyes, but then we also get glimpses of Lestat from the vampire Lestat in those same flashbacks. This, while including more info from the further books, makes Lestat quite a confusing character. As Sam Reed mentions,
this is all through Louis' eyes, and is this actually how Lestat is, or is he different? And I think we play with that on and off.
The Lestat that is supposed to lean into the version of him that Anne Rice and the readers fell in love with starting from the second book is not really present in the show. We only get sneak peeks of his love for humanity and the complicated nature of his character. I'd argue that despite the fact that Sam Reed, in my opinion, does a great job with the material that he's been given, the show's Lestat is even more unlikable than the Lestat from the original book and the 1994 movie adaptation.
Be nice. I'm finding it. It take you that long to find it? It does.
This creator, Four Eyes, goes into detail when dissecting Lestat's character in the show, so I recommend you to check out the video. It's gonna be in the description, or you can click it at the top right corner right now. The majority of Lestat's unlikability comes from a very specific source, the changed relationship and power dynamic. The show changes the circumstances under which Louise and Lestat's relationship starts. Not only is Louis looking to escape the oppression he faces, which further increases the power imbalance in the relationship, but Lestat also courts him for quite a while, tormenting him and straight up killing a priest that Louis tries to confess to. In the book, the whole thing happens in a day, while the show's Lestat sneaks into practically any function Louis is present at and literally gets into his head with the whole "oh, come join me, come be a vampire, you can escape this thing" stuff. As literally pointed out in one of the episodes, the new racial makeup of the couple further skews the already skewed power dynamic.
Some things you don't get about America, Lestat. Yes, let's have this conversation again. Color, white, Creole, French.
The show's Lestat is quite ignorant of Louis' problems. Like when we see Louis take revenge on the man that is trying to push him and other black people out of business, Lestat does not recognize the real reason. As described by Jacob Anderson, I think some of Lestat's behavior is racist, but he's not racist actually. He's ignorant in a very particular way. He's very, very old. Also, he doesn't see the world through a human lens. He sees that Louis has acted on a vampiric impulse. He completely misdiagnoses that act and what it was about. The topic also comes up on the podcast.
There's a racial component to it as well, where Louis' business is falling apart, and it's because of gentrification, racism, and he's feeling more and more helpless. And Lestat keeps telling him to be more and more free and to like give in to who you are and be the vampire I know you are and all this kind of stuff. And Louis like, but me being a vampire doesn't buy me out of the way other people perceive me. It doesn't buy me out of this real shit in the world.
The events of the third episode are obviously not the full extent of the power imbalance. The show makes Lestat a literal wife beater, husband beater, vampire spouse beater. Doesn't matter, a piece of shit. It features a very graphic sequence depicting him essentially almost killing Louis and then taking him in his arms, flying up in the sky and dropping him back to the ground, knowing he will not die as he's a vampire and just torturing him.
Because I don't have any social media, but I tried to not look, but I knew that there was quite a visceral reaction to episode 5, to the violence, the domestic abuse at the end of episode 5, and I knew that I knew this was going to be quite an extreme moment for people to process.
And an extreme moment it fucking was. The fights and brawls that Anne Rice describes in Interview with Vampire do not have the same level of power imbalance. Sure, Lestat is an older and stronger vampire, but Louis still has the capability to step up to him. Whereas the fight depicted in the show is literally just Lestat beating the shit out of Louis while their adoptive daughter Claudia watches. And then he also torments Claudia when she tries to run away, namely by mass murdering people and then using a dead man's head as a puppet to cause further distress on her. And then he drags her back to the US with him against her will. Thus, when it comes to Louis and Claudia's attempt at murdering Lestat, you're not rooting for them to succeed because your perception has been skewed by Louis' narrative, but because Lestat is a fucking perpetrator of extreme domestic violence. Hi, editing me here. I know that season 2 is supposed to have like a lot of twists and turns based on how memory distorts things, and I suspect that the creators will probably pull Louis is just misremembering things regarding the domestic violence scene too, because that's referenced in the whole season tagline about memory being a monster or whatever. However, if they do that, I don't know how I'm gonna feel, but it's probably not gonna be good, considering how society as a whole
treats victims of domestic violence. Like, it's a topic that needs to be approached with a lot of caution and a lot of nuance. And paired with the fact that the creators already used sexual assault as a way to make Claudia a stronger character and show who grows a person, it does not, look good. And it shows a lack of understanding of this complex topics.
We don't really get the chance to fall in love with Lestat. We get the chance to fall in love with Sam Reed's dedication and jawline. Speaking of Louis and Claudia killing Lestat, that's another detail that the show changed. In the book, it's Claudia who carries out the whole plan down to slashing Lestat's throat, and then Louis just dumps the body into a swamp, as described in the novel.
And then from beneath the pillows on the couch, she drew a kitchen knife. "Claudia, don't do this thing," I said to her. But she flashed at me a virulence I'd never seen in her face, and as I stood there paralyzed, she gashed his throat, and he let out a sharp, choking cry.
In the show, it's Louis who finishes Lestat off, which feels pivotal considering the changes we have just discussed, namely the severity of the abuse he endures. He then dumps the body into a landfill, and that, as Daniel points out, has stronger implications that he was reserving an opportunity for Lestat to actually survive. The last main character of the season that we have not discussed yet is Claudia. She, just like Louis and Lestat, undergoes quite a lot of changes which impact her character and character arc in a major way.
To start off, the show's Claudia is black, just like Louis. Thus, their bond against Lestat gets even stronger than in the original.
Because Lestat simply does not get it and refuses to admit that vampirism does not help transgress race and society's treatment of those deemed the other. As Shunyata puts it, vampirism for him birthed an identity crisis larger than the one he was already going through, and finally he has someone to share this misery with. While Claudia wears her fangs proudly like Lestat, she is more empathetic to the plights Louis has faced throughout his life. The bond between Claudia and Louis is also influenced by the changed story of Claudia's origin. In the book, Louis feeds on Claudia during a particularly low moment when he encounters her literally sitting in a room with her mother's corpse, and then comes to hate himself for it almost immediately. And I felt, yes, damned, and this is hell. And in that instant I had bent down and driven hard into her soft small neck, and hearing her tiny cry, whispered even as I felt the hot blood on my lips. Then Lestat uses Claudia as a baby trap of sorts.
The doctor was saying how glad he was we'd come for her, how most of them were orphans. He thought Lestat was the father, and in moments Lestat was running through the streets with her.
In the book, Claudia is Lestat's attempt at salvaging the relationship. I mean, he literally says, "The child's alive, Louis. You left her breathing. Shall I go back and make her a vampire? We could use her, Louis, and think of all the pretty dresses we could buy for her." The show, however, flips the whole thing. Within its narrative, Louis actually saves Claudia from a fire set to Storyville during race riots, given the race riots that were caused by Louis himself, killing and publicly hanging a racist character whose name I do not remember and do not want to remember. These circumstances, as well as Louis struggling with his humanity and vampire identity, led to him saving Claudia in an attempt to prove to himself that he's not all bad after all. Jacob Anderson discusses this on the podcast.
Claudia is a way for him to absolve himself of guilt. Okay, if I can save this one human, then I can kind of save them all, at least in my eyes. I can forgive myself for what I've done, for what I've wrought on this community, if I just save her.
He also views her as a replacement for the family he lost, to make up for the things that Lestat does not get or does not want to get. Here's how Bailey Bass, who plays Claudia in the first season, describes that.
What do you think Louis is trying to get from Claudia that he can't get from Lestat?
He wants a sister. His relationship with Grace is not, it's just tearing away bit by bit, and he just wants a sister, and that's what he gets from Claudia. But then he also wants this family unit.
More to that, Claudia, who was 5 in the book and around 10-ish in the movie, gets aged up to 14, which once again reframes her character and the way she operates within the show's world. This Claudia's motivations and challenges she faces are quite different from what we see in the 1994 adaptation or in Anne Rice's work. She's essentially going to be going through puberty forever. As put by Bailey Bass, she's stuck in this younger body. Her brain never develops. I mean, we say that the prefrontal cortex, that doesn't develop until you're 25. That's what makes decisions. She doesn't have that. It's never gonna develop fully, so she's always gonna act on feeling first. That is demonstrated clearly in her relationship with Charlie, the boy she falls in love with and then accidentally kills in the spur of the moment. Claudia is then forced to confront the fact that it's not a question of how much her mind matures, but the question of the fact that her brain and her body are going to be stuck on the onset of puberty for forever.
Claudia is a 14-year-old girl that gets turned into a vampire by the vampire Lestat and then has to deal with feeling the emotions of a 19-year-old, then a 30-year-old, then 40-year-old, while still being stuck in this 14-year-old young body.
Now, I could not find a concrete source that discusses the reason for this creative liberty. Some speculate that it's because a child actor would not have legally been allowed to work the hours that the show needs, which sounds plausible, but then again, I cannot dig into the creators' heads and actually know what they were thinking. Regardless of the reason, I do think that the changes made to Claudia's character and story are very interesting, as they give the show more story to mine from. We have already seen a pretty faithful adaptation, and refilming that but with just a different actress would have honestly been
boring, yawning, sloppy, lazy.
The themes that get explored through Claudia's character remain largely the same. We see her grow into a woman in a body of a child, try to navigate love and grown-up life, but this time from a new angle. Overall, I found the first season to be a very interesting and refreshing take on the vampire classic, despite the fact that they make Lestat into someone even more horrible than in the original book. After all, I know Sam Reed did his best at giving the audience an opportunity to fall in love with the character. The other choices the creators made serve as an opportunity to explore the same topics, but from a different point of view or within a different frame. I had a great time watching the first season and researching the creative process behind the adaptation as explained by writers, actors, and showrunners. It seems like the entire team has a lot of love for Anne Rice's work, which makes me optimistic about the show's future. More to that, we get vampire sex and actors who can actually act, unlike Brad Pitt. Also, Bailey Bass, I'm begging, just one chance. So yeah, that's that. I know I am late to the party, but I'm still gonna be glad if you share your thoughts and opinions on the first season in the comments. And please let me know if I missed anything. I don't think I did, but I might have.
Editing me again. Special shout out to the Twitter user Filthy Valeska. I've used a lot of their memes in this video, and their stuff makes me laugh on a daily, so, you know, I thought I need to give credit where credit is due. Oh, and I hope everyone enjoyed the Dad Lestat drag type of stuff I got going on today. And also that YouTube does not block the video based on the sheer amount of fake blood that I poured all over myself for this. And one thing before I go. For those who did not yet see the post that I made to the community tab, YouTube told me I can now monetize my channel, which I happily applied for. I'm very grateful for you guys' support and the opportunity it provides me. And my main goal, as of now, is to save up and buy a camera and a better mic to up the production quality. And maybe try and cover the small expenses that are now present in my life because of the videos, like the books and the props and the fake blood and all of that. I'm really glad people have been active on my channel, especially under the last video, and I hope to continue creating Yapfests. Yeah, now that's that.